So architecture is supposed to be a soaring combination of human wisdom, of geometry, for architecture, the beauty of stone, and it's to the glory of God, to the greater glory of God. So Gothic, collegiate Gothic was started, as I said, in the Middle Ages in England, and then transferred all over. And it was brought back to this country based on Oxford and Cambridge, which are, especially Cambridge, if you've ever been there, the east part. Oxford is, if you look at London, as London is here, this is Oxford. And this is Cambridge, way at the east coast, on the east coast. So, and it's more modern, it's got all these beautiful collegiate Gothic buildings. And they, again, you can't, and when people see that, their minds say, this is not what we live in, these square boxes. So this is, in the churches, there's something special. This building, but we don't see the facade. That's the problem. We're inside, but the people going by say that is a faith-based school, and it's also the highest intellectual achievement. So it's a combo with that style called collegiate Gothic, and it combines, which was an age of faith, the Gothic cathedrals, which, as you know, as a broken arch, so it's hands praying, if you will. The Roman arch is, right, it's a barrel, and it's typical feminine architecture because it's round, right? That's, if you look, and then I'm sure they taught you, Gothic is quite masculine because it's got, men are angles, women are, by their very nature, we thrust, they receive. But, I mean, this is, now that's Gothic. The great cathedrals of Europe are Gothic. Well, they imitated that in England, so it was called collegiate Gothic because the schools were not only to teach the secular arts, but they also were to give the Word of God. And what is the real motto of this school? Religione et bonis ardibus. To religion and the fine arts. That's our motto if you look at it on your ring. This is my lacrosse ring. But religio is so, this combines, the Gothic is prayer and learning. The Gothic collegiate. And if you go to McKinley High School on Russell, it's the same style. It was, what, in 1880, it was revived. Washington University is with its quadrangle, that's Oxford. So you brought the age of faith and the age of learning together. You couldn't separate them. So this architecture, 1924, right, built by people inspired by Gothic, collegiate Gothic. Especially if you go to not Harvard, but Yale and Princeton, those are Gothic. And many of our Jesuit schools, not St. Louis U, but I think of Loyola, New Orleans, I mean, they have Gothic arches. Marquette, Gothic. That was, do you understand, how it brings Oxford, the great learning of the Middle Ages and age of faith, prayer, and that architecture embodies religion and the fine arts. That's our motto. And the architecture reflects that original motto, not meant for others, that came from.
At SLUH, so when you say, so if you say God and meaning, I mean, I guess those two are kind of tied into each other. What I'd probably say is, most often it comes in the experience of the classroom or the friendship or the community. So I was talking, I remember when I was interviewing here, Mr. Linares and I were actually talking about neuroscience in the brain, and one of the things that a lot of scientists will say is that all our thoughts, our consciousness sort of manifests as, it's just a bunch of chemicals reacting. And that builds up who we are, and we live in this sort of illusion that we're someone or something. And we were discussing how, in a sense, you know, if you look at a church or a school, it's an empty building, it's a vessel. You look at the skull, it's this empty vessel that holds your brain. And your brain, all those little things, those little processes, all those things that happen. Or you go into a church and all those people that get together and sing and profess their belief. Or you go to a soccer game, or even, God help us, a mixer. You go somewhere, but you see all these people interacting and having these moments. And there's something transcendent in that, in the way that can happen. And that it becomes something larger than its parts. And so I've always felt around SLUH and around in my experiences, it's been the small little moments, but over the course of a day. You know, you have a nice class, you run into a kid that you taught earlier, you're joking with your colleagues, and so those moments sort of make me feel part of something larger than myself, and part of that idea of God. And so, you know, a lot of people, they'll find it in church, or they'll find it in one place, but I've always sort of found it all over the place. That would be at SLUH where I find God. And meaning, I think, comes from, the meaning of it all comes from my experiences. You know, why every day, why am I doing this? How do I do this? And every day it's, you know, working with people, the interactions, the joy of the classroom, and I think that's where it comes from. That it's not even a validation, it's a sense of purpose, and it feels nice to have. It's a goal that can never be reached. Like, I will never be able to get all of my students to, you know, where I want them to be, but that's okay. It's, you're working towards something, and you're putting aside a lot of, I'm hopefully putting aside a lot of myself and saying, okay, here's what I want to do, but here's also where I want other people to be. And it goes back to the community that works. All these little things become something.
But it faces the park, and as you walk across the park, as I do, and there it stands, you know, like a beacon of truth and of faith, and a blighted neighborhood, which it was for many years. And that's why they built these beautiful schools like McKinley and all through St. Louis. The poor people had no homes to live in, but they had centers of learning. Learning was special. The library, one of the most beautiful ones, is down there on, what, 16th and Locust. Go down there, it's extraordinary. It's not collegiate Gothic, it's more of the Renaissance, with the coffered ceilings and all that. But you get Christ Church, right across from it is Christ Church Cathedral, a pure Gothic gem, the Episcopal Church. Grace, it is really England brought here. But so the churches were beautiful for people who had no homes. God's house is beautiful. His seat of learning is beautiful. Schools, libraries, the law court, because justice is from God, right? Balance the equation. The law courts. Those are the main things: the churches, the schools, the law courts. What did I miss? But those are where people gather. Everything was meant to raise your mind into something beautiful, which we don't have in ordinary life, because a lot of people were just plain old poor, especially in Europe. The kids who went to those universities, which was free, by the way, this was, it raises your heart and mind to God. That's what this is supposed to do. So it does for an old romantic soul or an old graduate school. They've been driving by, people see it, it stands there. Not like CBC, which is, you got to be driving east to see it, the full facade here. Everybody sees it from the highway, from everywhere, because it's on the hill and there. And that it associates itself with the Gothic collegiate, which is Oxford, which is Cambridge, the seats of learning in Western Europe. The Sorbonne doesn't have anything like that in Paris. It's just a bunch of buildings, like St. Louis in a way. But there is a unity of the architecture all through the city of Oxford. Not only the public buildings, but the private buildings. They're Tudor Gothic, because they got, you know what I mean? You talk about the thatched roof and the beams, and then the plaster between them, that's Tudor Gothic. Collegiate Gothic is all stone with the beautiful arches and the courtyard. When I was here, this was entire grass. There was none of this parking lot. That was our field. So we tried in our best to imitate the seats of learning of Europe and the seats of faith. They were always together. Religione et bonis artibus, to religion, faith, and to the fine arts. This is built in the honor of God and man. God made man. And of course, wisdom is the incarnation. Christ is
the question is, where do you find God and meaning at SLUH, but in like the physical parts of SLUH?
There are lots of times when I'm here late at night, or early in the morning before anybody else gets here, and as I walk the halls, it's like I feel the presence of everybody that's come here before. We have a SLUH pew in our house that we bought at a Caspa auction, and sometimes when I'm sitting in that, I'm thinking, well, this used to be in the chapel And then when I go in the chapel, or if I'm in one of the pews, I'm thinking that my father-in-law probably sat in this very pew when he was a student here 60 years ago. So I get that sense of that we're part of this, not only the brotherhood that's here now, but this collective of all the people that have ever been associated with this place. And it's neat to feel their presence as I go through here, especially in those spiritual moments, like when it's dark and you're looking down one of these hallways that is reminiscent of Hogwarts or something, and that it's with its grandeur and its glory and its arches and those kind of things.
A couple. One would be cliche, but it's the wrestling room. I mean, that's always been, that's where I coach. It's where a lot happens. It's both a physically demanding place, but there's a lot of emotional part to it. But there's a tree out there. If you could look outside the window, and I love the framing of it. You can see, in the winter it's kind of ragged and dead, but spring comes around, it's going to blossom, you're going to have all the leaves on it, and you can look out on a windy day and see it sort of shaking between the buildings. And it's in a weird place. I mean, most of our other trees are on their own. They're out in nature. They're on the grass. They're carefully cultivated. And someone planted that tree there in the middle of all that concrete. It's growing in there. I love that. And then, if just in general, that spot I showed you, I just love the architecture of all those right angles and all those squares in the alley. And that's Mr. Assam showed
One
me
spot
that.
I've been through a hard time, and Mr. Ratterman had been through a hard time. We climbed the top of the fire escape stairwell over here that sticks out from the J wing. You have a nice view out of the upper field and all. And we went up there and encouraged each other and so forth. And that's a spot. And every once in a while I'll be up on the third floor and I'll take those stairs to come down. I never pass through that spot without remembering that moment of generosity on his part. Grateful for him, and that's
So you find God in the learning, in the architecture. Everything's supposed to remind us. Even the Donny Fieldhouse is supposed to, with its arch, that Gothic. Notice it's not the Roman arch, which is round, but it has that beautiful combination of both. So the Gothic point and then the round. So you have the masculine, the feminine. Notice that, very important for these non-sexist ages. Equality among all. In Christ there is no division, Greek, Jew, man, woman are all the same. So all that architecture is supposed to raise our minds to religion, faith, and also where it's found in the secular world, which is the learning process, the fine arts especially. So Mr. Miller would be happy to hear this.
Windows over the field house. Yeah,
So, do you find God here, Mr. Miller?
we're in the Gothic windows of the field house.
Why are you such a
I find God in cold Tarless doing beautiful work like this. That's the truth.
There you go.
Turn it off.